HARK, we are here. It is time for yet another episode of Star Wars Unlimited. Today, we have something a little bit different. We have our normal previews like we go over, but over the last week, period of time since last recording to last recording, we had a FFG developer Q&A, which was on a bunch of different sections of the social media sites. I have a listing here from SWU Holocron, which is a great website. You should go check it out. Link in the description below. That has all of this stuff together, and we're going to go over that once all the previews are finished. We also have inside these previews a couple of really cool cards, and one card that I'll say is the strongest card in the game and probably will be for quite some time. And the reason why might surprise you given the way that it looks, but given a rules clarification for that specific card, it has made that effect as well as other effects of its kind overly useful. And I'll get more into that later with the actual details of the preview itself. But let's get started right into the previews, and then we can go into that lovely Q&A. Our first two previews come by way of Maindeck Dan, and these are two very interesting cards. One is a very flavorful card and is going to fit right into Grand Admiral Thrawn, and the other one after is something. But our first card here is Chimera, flagship of the 7th Fleet. Goes with that 7th Fleet Defender. 8 cost, Cunning Villainy space unit, 8 power, 7 health, Imperial Vehicle capital ship. It is shielded, so when you play the unit, it gets a shield token. On attack, name a card. An opponent reveals their hand and discards a card with that name from it. So this goes along with the information that you have with Grand Admiral Thrawn of being able to see top cards of each player's deck at the very beginning of the round, your deck and your opponent's deck, utilizing Thrawn's ability to be able to exhaust a card based upon the resource. But if that card from the previous round ends up in your opponent's hand and stays there if they didn't resource it, and you drop this, or you have dropped this and can attack with it, you will be able to know pretty much with most certainty that there's going to be that card in your opponent's hand. It's going to take some mind presence to be able to make sure that you remember all of the cards that are given to you in terms of information off the top of the deck, but you can also make some pretty educated guesses based upon what your opponent is playing as a leader and a base and their aspect combination thereof. Being able to reveal your opponent's hand and get all that information, even if you whiff, you can't discard the card. You know what's in your opponent's hand, so you can pretty much know what's coming. Thrawn's whole strategy, and this is a major part of it, is just knowledge of what your opponent is doing, and that is why I think Thrawn is going to be one of the strongest leaders in the game. And if you're interested in more information on that, Roll On Gaming on YouTube is started a series of videos called the Thrawnicles, where Kevin from Roll On Gaming goes through and gets a basic idea right now of what Thrawn's going to look like with the card pool we know of so far, and some ideas on what cards would be very powerful in Thrawn in the future. So if you are going to be a Thrawn player, Kevin's your guy because he's very excited for Thrawn, and he's probably going to be one of the best sources of knowledge for Thrawn because he has decided early on to focus on that hero as his focus of not necessarily content creation, but potentially deck development. We're all going to build a bunch of decks, but there's going to be some of us who have very narrow focuses on leaders, much like in Flesh and Blood, where you play one specific hero from a class and you learn that hero and everything that you're supposed to do with it. So Chimera is pretty cool. The stats are a little under-skewed here for an 8 cost, 8 power, 7 health, but you do get that shielded token, which can protect you from a large section of damage. This is going to be much harder to take out because it is a space unit, so there isn't a big section of large power space units. It's going to take an event or basically another Star Destroyer to knock this thing out, or an overwhelming barrage, but then you're also playing against villainy, which is a huge thing. Anyway, Chimera, very cool ship, unique flagship of the 7th Fleet. Our next preview, Vigilance unit. You're going to look at it and be like, what are you talking about? But we're going to go through a couple of things really quick and make sure you all understand exactly what I'm talking about. So let's start with Regional Governor. 2 cost Vigilance ground units, 1 attack, 1 power, 4 health, Imperial Official. When played, name a card. While this unit is in play, opponents can't play the named card. It's a rare, number 62 out of 252 in SOR. Vigilance, very strong aspect. It's a lot of control, being able to put shields on your own units to stop your units from dying, just flat out defeat your opponent's units depending on what they have on the board and what they're capable of. Things like Vanquish, Dooku, Takedown, they just delete something off the board, sometimes with restrictions. Regional Governor is the type of card that basically says you cannot play this card. So if I play Regional Governor and I'm worried about my opponent taking control of my strongest unit, I say, I am playing Regional Governor, I declare Change of Heart. Change of Heart is a card that cannot be played while the Regional Governor is on the board. You stick a shield on the Regional Governor in some way, shape, or form, throw some protection down in front of it with Sentinels, so on and so forth. It's still vulnerable to defeat effects. With its 4 health, it is able to stick on the board a little bit longer than other characters, other units, and demands a response to the effect. Now, we're going to go to a tweet. This tweet here is from Tyler Parrott, and it specifically says, once we settled on the current unique rule, we decided to make a few incentives to play different characters since multiple versions in play at once felt weird to many. Hence, Regional Governor. Name Luke Skywalker and your opponent's hands of all Lukes cannot be played. This ruling here from a senior game developer, designer, whatever the specific title is, differs from the ruling of pretty much every other game that exists in the space. I can't think of any other one that allows such a huge blanket effect for similarly named cards. And normally you would just say, I say shock cannot be played, or I name a card, it's shock. Or, for example, you say it's that one card that costs 1 red mana that deals 2 damage to a target. By saying that if I name Luke Skywalker, all Lukes cannot be played while Regional Governor is on the board. That also means the previous card that we saw, Chimera, if you say Luke Skywalker, any version of Luke Skywalker from your opponent's hand can be discarded as a result of that Chimera effect. What this effectively means is that any effect that says name a card will be stronger based upon the ability of the game to have multiple characters with the same name. Now, we don't have a lot of those yet right now, but this is Star Wars Unlimited. We're going to be playing this game for a while, should all things be equal, and it means that with this specific card, you can stop your opponent's entire strategy if they have an overwhelming force. Or let's say another card comes out that says you can have as many copies of this in your deck as you want. Let's just say it's basically X-Wing. That is the card that exists. You throw 10 X-Wings in your deck. Your opponent drops Regional Governor, knows you're running X-Wing Tribal, and says X-Wing. You now have 10 cards in your deck that just can't be played. Or there's an effect that says name a card. Your opponent discards that card from their hand. Search your opponent's discard pile and deck and remove all copies of the named card from the game. So if you say Luke Skywalker, or as the fun Discord trope is, Darth Vader, and you've got 8 different Vaders in your deck, and that card hits the Vader from your hand and then removes all Darth Vaders except for your leader from the game, that becomes a significant issue and is a power that needs to be reined in. I think that there are instances of interaction that have not been considered as a result of this specific ruling, and I believe it is a result of trying to reinvent the wheel, and this is one of the major pieces of rules making that so far has been done by FFG that I 100% disagree with. Regional Governor is a very strong card as a result of that. It's still a little weak, but it is a target of, I need to make sure this thing is dead. Otherwise, my opponent is going to be able to restrict my plays based upon knowledge of my deck, knowledge of my hand, knowledge of my board. And if you decide to play Thrawn with Cunning and Vigilance, this slots right into that deck immediately, along with all of the other removal cards. That makes it so that Thrawn controls the pace of the game, and you can't really recover from that, especially if the Regional Governor comes down. Remember, this is not a unique card, so if you can get 3 of these down and name 3 different cards, your opponent's in trouble. The ruling makes this card stronger than it should be. That's the ultimate opinion of this creator here on YouTube. I think that it's a mistake to rule it the way that it is. The way that it is ruled, I think this is one of the strongest cards in the entire game, and I don't think that's going to change regardless of what other 120 cards we see from now. I could be wrong, and if I am wrong, I will freely admit that on a future video, but for right now, Regional Governor is really, really good. Next, we have 2 previews from a foreign language creator. I didn't actually catch which language this was, but the name is DeanTramp Trading Cards, and they've provided to us 2 really cool cards that we're going to go over here and showcase to you how cool these cards are. Starting with a Patrolling V-Wing, 2-cost command space unit, 1 power, 1 health, vehicle fighter. When played, draw a card. It's a common, number 111 out of 252, an SOR. All right, class, we're going to say the thing, and the thing is drawing cards is always good. It seems that they've kind of pegged down pay 2 to draw a card. We saw that on the Mining Guild TIE Fighter. When you attack, you can pay 2 to draw a card. We're seeing it here, pay 2 to draw a card. And I'm sure you can suss out other effects that say draw a card and how those cost with other multi-part abilities. Sure, this is a dinky little fighter in space. It's going to get blown up by literally anything and everything. But it is a card that replaces itself. It doesn't make a massive impact on your resource requirements. And if you've got 2 open or 2 floating at any point in time, and you have this in your hand, you're playing command, and you want to draw the card, place it down, draw a card. You can always resource it if you don't need to draw a card. 2 cost to draw a card and have a 1/1 body in space is actually quite good, and can take out things like Wing Leader and the TIE Fighter. So I think this is it's not an insane card. It's not the greatest card in the game, like one of the greatest cards in the game, like the last card we saw with Regional Governor. But 2 cost, draw a card, 1/1 body. Very, very good for the cost and what it allows you to do with strategy in the game. Next, we have a card that I think a lot of Rebels fans are going to like, some Obi-Wan Kenobi fans are going to like, and people who are excited to play the Grand Inquisitor are going to like. We have 5th Brother, Fear Hunter. 3 cost, aggression, villainy, ground unit. 2 power, 4 health. Force Imperial Inquisitor. This unit gains raid 1 for each damage on him. On attack, he may deal 1 damage to this unit and 1 damage to another ground unit. It's an uncommon, number 131 out of 252, and SOR. This guy, little chunky, little clunky as well, but he has an interesting way of getting around getting too much power like Grit does for the Grand Inquisitor's effect. Because for each damage on him, he gains raid 1. During the attack, you have a beginning step that turns raid on. So raid is on once you start attacking. On the attack effect, you can deal a damage to this unit and another ground unit to be able to turn on that raid 1. It's a static effect. It's not a triggered effect. It just happens at all points in time, as long as you are attacking. And each time a damage is dealt to him while he's attacking, he'll gain that extra power. So if you attack with 5th Brother, deal a damage to himself, he's now a 3 attack because of raid, and then he only has 3 health, but you've also dealt a damage to another ground unit. If then you use the Grand Inquisitor's effect to ping him, to ready him, you now have extra damage on him for increased raid. Whether that's the leader side, which I believe does 2 damage, and the unit side that does 1 damage, it all depends. Sticking something like Resilient on this card is going to be really good because that gives the extra health on the unit to get it to survive, or something like Fallen Lightsaber, which allows him to get +3/+3 for 3, and also the additional damage to everything on the opponent's side of the ground arena, and his own on-attack effect. A lot of extra attack power coming out of 5th Brother. I still don't think Grand Inquisitor is a deck that I myself am going to play, but if we get more cards like this that can reliably allow the Grand Inquisitor to use his effects very well, there is a possibility that 5th Brother, or that the Grand Inquisitor becomes a very playable deck, but still not like hyper meta or even like low competitive meta. I just think Grand Inquisitor's effect requiring 3 power or less is very weak, unless we get a whole huge package of all of the Inquisitors that gain bonuses like this, raid for each damage on them, and don't gain bonuses like Grit. Other than that, though, this is a very good card, especially for an uncommon. I think even outside of a Grand Inquisitor deck, this is probably going to be very useful. Throw this in Vader, and if you've got Vader's Saber for Vader himself and the Fallen Lightsaber for him, you can do a lot of really good with a unit that's like this. You just got to make sure it doesn't get auto-defeated or blown up with a bunch of extra damage, because if your opponent's running Tarkin Town, for example, and you use his ability, he dies on the next epic action activation for the opponent using Tarkin Town on your unit because it's already been damaged. Neat card, though. I'm hoping to see more Inquisitors. I don't know how many more we're going to get in this set, but it's still a neat card nonetheless. Our next card actually comes directly from Xander Tabler on the Discord, Star Wars Unlimited Discord. It's a very interesting preview. Our community engagement specialist treated us very nicely by throwing this on the Discord and allowing people to have a lot of discourse for it. It's a very interesting card. It's also our first representation of the sequel trilogy. We have here Black One, character representation or vehicle, whatever you want to call it. Black One, Scourge of Starkiller Base. 6 cost, aggression, heroism, space unit. 4 power, 4 health, resistance vehicle fighter. When played and or when defeated, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. This is a legendary, number 147 out of 252 in SOR. Fantastic little space unit. It allows you to recoup the cards from your hand, and as an aggression player or using the aggression aspect, you're going to be using a lot of these. I think that this is probably a really good example of a 1 or 2 of in your deck that gets you 3 cards into your hand when necessary, pretty much at any point in time. Now, again, let's say the line, drawing cards is always good, even if you have to discard your hand, because you get to choose when this happens in terms of when you play this card. If you're down to your last card and you go black 1, you say, cool, I have played the card. I'm going to discard the 0 cards in my hand. I now draw 3 cards. The fact that this happens when played and when defeated is actually really cool. You have less control over when defeated, which means you can also just say, well, I got the benefit at the beginning. I don't need it now, unless the cards that you drew or cards later on in the rounds were just terrible and you need more cards off the top of your deck quickly. You're probably not going to use the when defeated effect, but it is there and open and available for you to use, and that is fantastic. I love it. I think it's great. I think this is a great representation for Poe Dameron in his ship, although I guess technically it's the ship itself, not necessarily him. A deck that's going to be running Aggression Heroism is likely going to be running at least 1 or 2 copies of this card for that, oh crap, I need cards in my hand, throw black 1 down. Is it the strongest fighter in space? No. Is it a very good card? Yes. Our last preview of the week comes by way of the Unlimited FFG Twitter account, and it's another Cunning card as part of Cunning Month. And this is not only great art, not only just great art, but an interesting card design. This is called Snapshot Reflexes. It is a 1-cost Cunning Upgrade. When played, you may attack with attached unit. It gives you +1/+1. It is a learned upgrade. It is a common, number 215 out of 252 in SOR. Great art here of Mando shooting with his pistol in what looks to be Tatooine, I think. Probably. I looked at this card initially and I'm like, this card is terrible. And then I looked at it again and I'm like, wait, there's actually a lot of synergy with Snapshot Reflexes. At its base, it's a 1-cost experience token, but because it has the attached ability of when played, you may attack with the attached unit, it's a weaker surprise strike, but it sticks around and gives you a little bit of survival in addition to that. Now, it's not an event, so that means it doesn't proc Bosk's effect. But if with this attack you kill something while you're playing Boba Fett leader, you can actually effectively get the experience token and the attack for free because you just untap or you ready the resource that you spent for Snapshot Reflexes. Now, much like every other card that does attacks, your unit has to be ready in order to be able to attack with. You can't attack with an exhausted unit unless something says otherwise. This does not. As your first action of the turn, of the round, if you're ready to actually attack, you play your Snapshot Reflexes, get that +1/+1, and then attack. That, I think, might actually be a very good strategy, especially for just 1. It's not a huge investment. You're not paying 3 for an upgrade. You're also not getting a bunch of extra bonus to it. But if it does pay off, it's effectively, if you're playing Boba Fett for Cunning, Boba Fett villainy, specifically Cunning villainy, doesn't matter what the extra one is, you effectively can kill a unit, make it attack, and get your resource back, all for 0. So it's interesting. It's a neat design. I think there is a lot of compelling nature to this, and if we get eventually down the line an upgrades matter strategy, this is going to be a prime resource in that, along with something like Resilient or Fallen Lightsaber or Entrenched if you're okay with not attacking the base. So this is a very neat card, very neat design. I'm looking forward to seeing more of this in decks, and I might have to try this out myself. On November 15th, FFG had a Q&A on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, answered by Danny Schaefer, MJ Cuts, Tyler Perot, Joe O'Neill, John Leo, Ryan Serrano, Jeremy Zrin, and Josh Massey. Each of these designers were answering questions that were provided by the public on these different platforms, and they've given a lot of cool pieces of information. So, Ozymandias card of the SWU Discord, also proprietor of SWU Holocron, gave me a link to the Q&A section here. We're going to go over some of the most important questions because there are 52 of them, and 58 of them. And if I sat here reading every single question, I'd be sitting here for an hour answering all the questions and stuff like that. If there are specific details you'd like to know, the link to this specific collation of answers will be in the description below, and you can check out all the different things yourself. SWU Holocron is actually actually a really cool website that you can use to check out some specific things. Think of it as Wikipedia, but for Star Wars Unlimited specifically, and not run by fandom, which is always a plus. We're going to go over individual questions that I think are going to be very necessary to answer, and that way I'm not going over the same thing multiple times. Any chance of a store locator on the official site for verified game night hosts and stores of product? I've been knocking on doors for shops in about a 25-mile radius, and an official database would be amazing. Yes, the website will have a store locator, says Josh. We had this answered before on a live stream, but it's actually good to have it in this Q&A specifically and in a central location for answers so that people know a store locator is coming, and that's going to be one of the big things that Josh is in charge of. Any chance to see an unboxing of upcoming SOR products during one of your streams to keep the hype going? Yes, there will absolutely be more streams, and many of them will be with products, says Danny. My speculation here is that we're probably not going to see any of those until January, given the holidays that are coming up and already in process, depending on when you watch this video. And it'll be 2 months away, so people can be super hyped, foaming at the mouth, getting ready to go for that March 8th launch of Star Wars Unlimited. Are cards legal in all languages for tournaments? Yes, but English rulings and wordings will be enforced. In addition to all of this, all cards in a deck must be the same language. I actually like this a lot. I think that making it so that your deck has to be in all one language reduces the amount of confusion between having different language cards. I know that a lot of Magic the Gathering players like to play Japanese cards and other language cards that they can just find in their decks, as long as they have ease of access of information to those cards. But this makes it so that if you're playing English cards, you're playing all English cards and everything is understood. And I like that a lot. I think that's a great way to reduce the confusion of rules interpretation depending on the wording in different languages. Can we put bases in our sideboard? No, says Tyler. This is an interesting decision. I do actually agree with it. It's one of those things that I thought that what was going to happen is, especially with things like Security Complex, being able to slot that in against an non-aggro matchup to get that extra shield is going to be would be very important for making that be a viable base within the game. Ultimately, however, whatever base you choose at deck building is the base you're going to use. Same thing with your leader, and your sideboard will be just cards that go into your main deck. That's a good decision. Do you expect the vanilla common bases to be balanced versus the rare bases in constructed deck building? Or is it expected that most competitive decks will take the rare bases? This is not an easy question to answer, but hopefully both will see competitive play. Rare bases are very powerful, but it will depend on the deck, says Jeremy. I appreciate this answer because Jeremy obviously has future information on sets 2, 3, 7, so on and so forth. Given the way that the game is going to be played in the first set, a lot of people are going to think that the rare bases are going to be the choice, but I think he's straddling that line of making sure that people know. The idea is that both are competitive, but he may have a specific opinion that he just doesn't want to express for that just yet. I appreciate this because I really do think that the 30 health bases are going to be the ones to run. Tarkin Town and ECL having the most use, I would assume, out of the 4 to be useful outside of the 30 deck bases. For now, we have seen limited board wipes in Aggression Villainy and Command Villainy. Our board wipes a mechanic that will only be in Villainy. They're not exclusive to Villainy, but you're right, they skew that way in set 1. So it does mean that eventually in the future, each aspect combination should have access to a board wipe or something that works in a similar vein. But right now, the big board wipe is Overwhelming Barrage, 100%. But it looks like Villainy, if you're playing Villainy, is going to be, at least in set 1, the we like to blow everything up aspect. And that's pretty cool. That bodes well for people who want to play Villainy leaders. How big are sideboards going to be? 10 cards, says Danny. Obvious answer is obvious. We didn't have that officially, but if it's not 15, it's certainly not going to be 9. This one's an interesting one. If you were to assign a classic archetype of aggro, mid-range, and control, which of the revealed leaders would you say represent each archetype best? Jeremy's personal answer is aggro is Sabine Wren, mid-range is Boba Fett, control is Redacted. We're going to do 2 of these at once because they're one after another. On one of the streams, you said the key theme for command is big units for villains and attacking together for heroes. Can you reveal what are the key themes for other aspects? Vigilance heroism is healing, vigilance villainy is self-damage and grit, aggression heroism is aggro, aggression villainy is control, sus, command heroism is hand disruption, and cunning villainy is events. So at least we get a basic rundown of what the developers think that each of these are right off the bat. And I like this next question here. Out of all the designers, who is the best player? Everyone specifically says Jeremy, except for Jeremy, who says Danny. And it's interesting because Danny did beat Jeremy twice in the starter deck games, but it's pretty much universally known that Jeremy is one of the top highest level competitive players for FFG games. And he just has that like throughput of competitive play built into him that allows him to just be a fantastic player as he plays the game. The cards look like they are written so that they could support more than 1v1 games in the future. Are there any plans for game modes that might 4 or more players play at once? If so, can you give any hints as to what those might be? There will be a multiplayer format, but they can't go into detail just yet. It does have unique deck building rules, and that's all they can say. Now, there's a bunch of questions in here in this Q&A that are repeats of things that we've known about for months. Repeats of questions that are asked in the same FAQ, and I don't know why they continue to answer the same question over and over, but this is one of those examples of where asking the same question pays off. Multiplayer formats will have unique deck building rules, and I'm very curious as to what that might be outside of what our current deck building is. So we'll have to see whenever they do a stream talking about multiplayer formats in the future. We have a good question here. Actually, 2 good questions we'll go over. What is each member of the team's favorite aspect combo from the first set? John says Command Vigilance. Tyler says Command Aggression. Jeremy says Cunning, excellent. Joe says Cunning, excellent. MJ says Command Aggression. Ryan says Aggression, Cunning, excellent. Danny says Cunning, Aggression. It's actually interesting. As rereading this question, Ryan says Aggression, Cunning. Danny says Cunning, Aggression. I think that means that they run different leaders for the same build, which is very interesting. Cunning, though, run by Jeremy, that's probably going to be one of the best decks in the entire game. Speaking of which, what is Jeremy's favorite leader to play? Or is it the one that hasn't been revealed yet? Jeremy says Boba Fett. Boba Fett is the correct answer, by the way. Always is. There's another question here, and the reason why I'm addressing it is because it specifically gives a reasoning as to why they did something specific, and on top of that, it proved me wrong for one of my earliest predictions about this set. Were sequel and prequel era cards included in Spark just cards you really wanted to depict right away, or a way to assure fans of all eras would get representation? The rest of this question doesn't matter because it's not answered or not relevant. Sequel and prequel era cards were included partially because we wanted the characters in the game sooner, and partially to set expectation that there would be off-themed cards in a small volume in every set. This is from Tyler. I did specifically say that I thought that the first set was going to be exclusively focused on the Galactic Civil War and would not have representations from the prequel or sequel trilogies. Obviously, given even just this video and a couple videos before, that is incorrect. And I'm okay with that being incorrect because it means that the larger theme of this set is still Galactic Civil War, but we can get a couple of extra characters that are plopped down. We've got Mace, we've got Dooku, we've got Black One. I'm sure we'll have another villainy style First Order something, but the main focus of the leaders and the main themes focuses in the set are still going to be Galactic Civil War, and that's fantastic. It does mean that they could throw something into a set to kind of shake things up or add support to a build that may not have been finished in a set beforehand, or sets up a build for a set that's coming in the future. Pretty interesting all around, though. So the last question we'll go over here for the Q&A is this question here at the bottom. I'm concerned about the number of legendaries in set 1. It is very difficult to gather 2x3 for a deck and almost impossible for 3x3 without spending a fortune. Can you drop something to calm this preoccupation? The way this question was worded is a non-English speaker. I can tell by their Twitter name. But effectively, there's a lot of legendaries that are in the set. There are a lot of legendaries that are strong. What can you say to assuage the concerns that legendaries are going to be stupid expensive? Tyler's response is, when designing and balancing cards, we don't correlate power to rarity. Power is correlated to narrowness, number of aspects, is it unique or not? And narrowness often correlates to rarity, but some of the most powerful cards in the set are commons. Basically saying not every legendary is going to be viable, not every legendary is going to be a 3 of in every single deck, so on and so forth. I think the concern that legendaries are going to be out of reach for most players is an important thing to discuss. But it's also one of those things that card games are expensive, just in general. So you'll still be able to play a lot of decks that are commons, uncommons, and rares. You'll still be able to get lucky with trades or be able to buy the cards off the secondary market. But if you're going into the highest levels of competitive play, you can't be worried about the cost of what you're playing because you're trying to play at the highest level. Competitive card games cost money. It's a fact of life. Magic, Flesh and Blood, Yu-Gi-Oh, all expensive cards and expensive ways to play. Pokemon is the one difference, but that's basically because you can build a competitive deck for a very low price, but it also means that all of your cards are effectively worthless unless they're the highest variance of rarities, and most competitive players don't play those unless they have a lot of money. It's a concern, it's a valid concern, but it's one of those things that people are going to have to balance if their intention is to be a highly competitive player in any card game. And that's about as concise a recap of the Q&A as I'll be able to make without going over all the duplicates, reading every single word of every single question, so on and so forth. There's a couple of other little tidbits in there about note-taking that's allowed and set one color distribution. And go check out the Q&A recap here on SWU Holocron. Again, link in the description below, and you'll be able to check out all the different answers for all the different questions. 58 questions. It was a lot of stuff. I think they answered questions over like 3 hours, but there's a lot of things in here, a lot of duplicates, a lot of low value questions that were answered for whatever reason. And I understand that people want to have a nice big open community, jokey, haha. But when it comes to the time that these developers have to answer questions, we need to focus on important things, not important things. So, but that is your Q&A recap. And it was really cool. Lots of cool answers, lots of cool information. I like the fact that cunning seems to be the big thing that informs a lot of my deck building choices going on into the future. We'll have to see how all of this works with everything that's included in Star Wars Unlimited once we know all of the cards in Set 1, Spark of Rebellion. A lot of stuff to go over this week. We had all those previews, we had the Q&A, we've got a bunch of other different things going on this week. There's a couple of things I'd like to bring to your attention. Links to all of these are going to be in the description below. As before, we have SWU Holocron, which was the location of all the Q&A information. It's basically the SWU wiki used in concert with SWUDB. You can get a lot of information together for everything that's going on in the game. So link to both of those are going to be in the description below. Also, Garbage Rollers is a really cool website and community group, podcasting group. Something. Content creation engine. There we go. That's the proper term. That hosts a recap of all of the content creators that they know of, weekly posts every week, I think on Friday. So there's a link to this past week's post by Garbage Rollers in there. But not only that, Garbage Rollers has some really cool content. They do articles about gameplay. They have a new player series going on for people who are brand new to TCGs in any way, shape, or form, or just new to the way that Star Wars Unlimited plays. They've got gameplay videos, a lot of different things. The people over at Garbage Rollers are really cool, so please go check them out. Again, link to their previous article in the description below. Lots of cool stuff and content coming out of them. Obviously, we talked about Roll On Gaming with Kevin's Thrawnicles series, but all of Roll On Gaming stuff is absolutely fantastic, and all of the people that are featured in the recap done by Garbage Rollers are really cool people for the most part. And you should check out any and every creator you possibly have the time to be able to do so, because we're all trying to do cool things on the internet, and it's really hard because all of the tools that we have are either expensive or very difficult to use. And then on top of that, a lot of the platforms we post on are actively working against us. So if you can go around and support creators, not just myself, but everybody that's out there that's doing content that you enjoy, that would be very helpful. So links to all those fun things in the description below. And that is it this week. Like I said, lots of stuff. Very interesting answers in the Q&A. Lots of really cool previews. One of the strongest cards in the entire game, supported by I think one of the strongest leaders in the entire game. But that's a separate thing, and we'll have conversations about that down the line. But yeah, that's it. Longer video than I was anticipating, but fun. Still fun to go through all the different things that we went through. So like and comment on the video everything that you think you're interested in going forward, what you think is happening, whether you agree with me that Regional Governor is one of the strongest cards in the entire game. Subscribe to the channel, follow me on all of my social media platforms at RybackStun, basically everywhere that you can find me, and if I'm not there, it's a platform not worth being on. That's all we wrote, all she wrote, all they wrote, all anybody wrote. Star Wars is in fact unlimited, and with that, I will see you in the stars.